Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's third Tuesday Go to Natchitoches show. We love Natchitoches. I think anytime that we can go there, we certainly do. It is the most historic city in the state of Louisiana and the Louisiana Purchase. It was founded in 1714. It's the original French colony and, as I was saying, oldest city in the state. It's also home to the Cane River Creole National Historical Park, which is actually the reason we went there in the beginning. And then we discovered the downtown is super cool, very historic. Then it's all part of the Cane River National Heritage Area. It's also the final destination of the El Camino Real de los Tejas National Historic Trail. So today we're going to talk about the American Cemetery. This cemetery is very historic. They say it's the oldest one in Louisiana, maybe even the Purchase. I don't know. But we have someone who can tell us all about it. In fact, we've met Scotty. Scotty Williams works at the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame, which is right. You can just hop, skip, and a jump from the Visitor Bureau, the Natchitoches Visitor Bureau, right downtown, across to the Sports Hall of Fame. This is quite a Hall of Fame. Even the architecture is incredible. And it's also connected to the Northwest Louisiana History Museum. So every month, I think it's the first, Scotty will have to tell me. Scotty, is it the first Friday that you take everyone?
First Friday, yes.
First Friday, you lead people on these tours. And as soon as I heard about them, I'm like, we have to do this. And it has not happened yet. So we are going to come back to Louisiana and we're going to come back to Natchitoches. Well, you just say the word Natchitoches and we'll go, but it's the cemetery. I don't know what it is, but we really do go back to the cemetery every time we come to Natchitoches. What is going on there? Why are we drawn to this cemetery?
Well, when I was thinking about it this morning, and I was trying to think about, okay, what if they ask me how big the cemetery is? I don't know an exact acreage on it, and so I looked it up, and I thought, well, gosh, when you compare it to some city blocks, it's not 7, 8, 9 city blocks big. It's maybe only 2 or 3 Natchitoches city blocks. But when you're inside the cemetery and walking around, it feels a lot bigger. If there are any Doctor Who fans, it's like the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside. And you just sort of slowly walk around and you feel sort of separated from the rest of town. And you can see a French grave from the 17 or 1800s and then turn around and there's a more recent burial. There's sort of a connection between the past and the present that happens when you're walking around the cemetery and a little bit lost in time and space while you go through. And
it is a part of the movie Steel Magnolias, which was filmed in Natchitoches and written, it's a true story from Natchitoches,
Yes. Yes. So the cemetery scene filmed in the American Cemetery, I think it's where they're sitting on the bench and Sally Field is encouraged to slap Weezer Boudreaux, Shirley MacLaine. There is a memorial, you wouldn't call it a memorial, a monument set aside that, recognizes the cemetery's place in the movie. When I was in graduate school, I spent a couple of Halloween seasons leading a so-called haunted history tour that one of our local organizations put on. And whenever we walked past the monument, I told people that it was a memorial to all of the Southern accents that were murdered during Steel Magnolias.
Oh, oh. Well, actually, it was funny that I'm going to have,
it's funny.
So, okay, so I have this book that Arlene from the Visitor Bureau said we had to have because I kind of got attached and Nancy's in the same thing. The American Cemetery, the oldest cemetery in the Louisiana Purchase. So it's not just Louisiana, it's the Purchase. That's old. And a Shrine to God in History, written by Payne Williams, which is your cousin, right?
My first cousin, correct.
So what is going on with your family in this cemetery?
Some of it comes from our grandfather. He was very big into genealogy and doing family research. And along the way, while he's researching our family, he's going to run into a lot of other people's history along the way. And I think, so when Payne was writing the book, I'm sure Papaw gave him some pointers on where to look information about some of the people who were buried there.
So Papa. So everybody,
Yes,
that's how you say it
yes,
correctly.
I say Papa. R.B. Williams, Judge R.B. Williams Sr.,
Ooh.
who passed away in 2001.
Oh, wow. And Papa, though, you don't hear that across America, just saying. So when you're talking about Southern accents, I'm like, that's how you say it.
Yes.
Papa, Papa.
Papa.
All right. So,
I like that.
well, this cemetery being the oldest in the Louisiana Purchase. So let's just retrace our footsteps for those who don't know the Louisiana Purchase, because this really stretched a swath of land that is beyond Louisiana, and that this kind of touches into the no man's land territory as well, right? Because of no man's land wouldn't have existed without the Louisiana Purchase.
Correct. The Louisiana Purchase itself, for people who might not know, happened in 1803. The American government wanted to buy basically New Orleans from Napoleon, and Napoleon sold them New Orleans and a whole lot more. It basically doubled the land area of the United States at the time. And the oldest permanent European settlement in the entire Louisiana Purchase is Natchitoches. As you mentioned, 1714. A Frenchman named Louis Juchereau de Saint-Denis left some troops behind.
We let you say that. See?
Well, you know, after a while, it just rolls off the tongue. He left some troops behind, and they eventually started a fort here called Fort Saint-Jean-Baptiste. And that's sort of the genesis of European colonization in this area. Native Americans, the Natchitoches native tribe was here for a long time before that.
And there's powwows coming up in November.
Yes, I think so.
November or December. I could get it wrong, but go to natchitoches.com, everybody. And it's Natchitoches.
Well done. I am impressed that you got that so fast.
It's a Mickey Mouse thing.
When people ask me about the name, I tell them it's a Native American word. It's spelled by the French and it's pronounced by Americans. So it's just kind of a mess all the way.
No, listen, and then there's Natchitoches down the road from me, which is the other part of the El Camino Real de los Tejas National Historic Trail.
And Natchitoches is the oldest city in Texas.
See, there it is.
It's the French who did it.
Yes, we can blame it all on they would have pronounced it Natchitoches or something like that.
Yeah, but we like French fries, so we'll be nice. But did they have anything to do with that? No, but
No.
I don't know. But I want to go back to this fort in Saint Denis, because that's as close as I'm going to get to his name. But we've been to the fort, which is a state park, and also a very the El Camino Real de los Tejas National Historic Trail. That's where the trail was going to this fort. Now, from what I've been reading and kind of checking out, and I don't know if I'm right, but where the fort is today and where the cemetery may have been in like opposite places or something like that.
The cemetery, the current location of the cemetery, I think was the site of the second French fort. The first one was burned down. The French built another one, and where the second fort was eventually sort of transformed into what's now the American cemetery. Because I don't know if there was ever an official founding date for the cemetery, but there would have been burials on that site while the fort was there.
Now, some say Saint Denis is buried at the fort.
I have heard that. I have also heard that he's buried at the corner of Front Street and Church Street in the historic district in town. I cannot say for sure where he is. It's possible either place.
He's that dude that walks at night from the cemetery to that corner and back.
He's the dude that I see paddleboarding on Cane River Lake every time I go by.
That's a lot of dudes who walk back and forth past the cemetery at night.
That's funny.
But if he's buried in the middle of the historic district, I think he's got a clothing store on top of it right now.
Oh
wow. He's playing Are You Being Served? No, but anyway, that's a whole other British comedy thing. But anyway, so no, but this is when you think about this history. I mean, we went to Bayou Rapides, the cemetery there.
Okay.
And that's also a very historic and older cemetery. And they had someone from the Revolutionary War, which you don't normally see this far, west. Right. We've done some of the East Coast now on our travels on our Love Your Parks tour, and I've decided that we have to really focus on cemeteries because they are resting places, they are historic sites, and in a way, they're parks because they're beautiful if they're being able to be maintained, and we
Yes.
need to support them. But Revolutionary War, heroes and veteran, well, they're not veterans at that point, but being buried there in Alexandria, that I thought that was pretty impressive. Do you have any in Natchitoches?
We do. We have at least two in the American cemetery that I can think of. One of
See,
the
they
Prudhoms,
can't just have one. You have to have
Yes.
two now.
one of the
Let's see.
Prudhoms has been marked by the SAR
Oh.
and DAR. The most well-known one that you might have heard of is Pierre Matoire.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He was part of the
Plantation.
Galvez troops during the American Revolution. At the time, Louisiana was owned by Spain, and Governor Bernardo Galvez put some troops from Louisiana together and fought a few battles trying to harass the British, because it was always fun to harass the British, but also to get on the good side of the Americans in case they won the revolution. So they sort of kicked the British out of Louisiana at maybe Baton Rouge and New Orleans. I think they also fought at Mobile and at least one other place.
That's
so
why
Pierre
spice
Matoire
came
was part
in.
of that.
That's why spice is in the cooking, really, is because the
That's
British don't want the
exactly-
spice. No, just saying. I'm
They
gonna get in
need
trouble.
the spice.
Well,
Uh-oh.
we're just saying from way back when there wasn't that much spice in that food. But when you go back to the Matoyers, that is Melrose Plantation history, and you
Yes.
mentioned Prudhomes, and Prudhomes, that goes back to Cane River Creole National Historical Park
It
because
does.
their bicentennial farm is there at Oakland
Yes.
Plantation.
The Prudhomes owned and worked Oakland for over 200 years. And as far as I can tell, they never threw anything away, which was of great help to us at the
Yes.
museum when we were opening up our regional history section. We have a lot of things on loan from the National Park Service that the Prudhomes were kind enough never to let go of for
Well,
for
when
literal
you go,
centuries.
well, that's what was so interesting about going to the plantation, to Oakland Plantation, was, here's this, big plantation. And of course there's, Elvin Shields' home, family home there,
yeah.
the crop sharer home. And there's all of these things to experience, and then going underground. And I mean, there's just not underground, but under the house, where slaves were kept. So there's all sides of history on this land.
Yes.
Melrose Plantation is also very fascinating that way. But and Magnolia on the other side of the Cane River Creole Historical Park. But at Oakland, what I thought was fascinating is here's this plantation, and then you go in the kitchen and you're like in the 50s suddenly, and it's
Yes,
like
I think
That's wild.
they interpret it up through the 1960s. With, you mentioned the kitchen, but also when you're on the house tour walking around, you see, oh, there's this antique thing here, and oh, there's this old painting of the first person to grow cotton on a large scale in North Louisiana. Oh, and there's a television.
Yeah, what the heck? You're supposed to stop.
Yes,
You're not allowed to progress, by the way.
but when you consider their interpretive plan, it goes up through the 60s. So the
That's
TV
so
does fit.
funny.
Yes.
And
I
the
mean-
bottle garden. We love the bottle garden.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yes, that's really cool.
And the different
actually did
shapes
that.
they arrange everything in. It's neat.
Yeah.
Yes,
no,
that the bottle garden inspired us to make a border around part of our flower beds with bottles dug into the earth with just a corner sticking out. It was really pretty.
mhm.
And we
It's-
have
And so for your
bottles.
listeners, this connects to the American Cemetery because of a lot of the people related to Oakland Cemetery, Oakland Plantation, are buried in their own enclosed space in the American Cemetery.
Hey, is the race car driver, just because you're in the
Yeah,
Louisiana Sports Hall of
Don-
Fame, is the Prudhomme race car driver
Don the
related to the
Snake
Prudhomme
Prudhomme.
family in
Prudhomme race
Louisiana?
car driver.
We
I
keep
don't
wanting to
know.
ask Arlene and people about this, and we keep forgetting. And now we're like, finally, yeah.
Yeah, because
I
we gotta
don't know.
look
I'm
this
not sure
up.
I've heard of.
It's
Interesting.
he was
we gotta look
called
this up.
Don the Snake Prudhomme.
Yeah.
Because
Of
he
course he
weaved in
was.
and out. Yeah,
Yeah.
so because he could pass people.
Mhm.
I don't
Now,
know why I know that, but I
But
do.
yeah, so I mean, I wonder if because the Prudhomme family is pretty prominent, right? And
In this area, they've been here for a very long time. I think when you go back and look at like some of the baptismal records or something, early on they showed up.
Then the Matoyer family from Melrose Plantation. Well, there's multiple people there, right?
Yes.
That's a big deal.
So
So okay, yeah. So I would have thought some would be at St. Augustine.
a
They
lot
would
of
be
them
buried
are.
there?
Pierre is in the American Cemetery. I think
Oh,
his children with Marie Therese Quan on down, most of them are probably either at St. Augustine or down in the Melrose Albertville area, or since then they have spread out all over the country. I don't know if any of Pierre and Marie Therese's children are in the American Cemetery. Some people think that Marie Therese is in the American Cemetery. We don't have a marked grave for her. My hunch has always been that she was buried at St. Augustine, but that's just my hunch. A friend of mine who knows a lot more about it than I do thinks that she's at another cemetery farther south down in Natchitoches Parish. So we talk about Marie Therese at on the American Cemetery Tour because she is a huge, huge, huge part of Pierre Matoyer's story. They had 10 children together. Their second son, their first son, Augustine, founded St. Augustine Church, and he's buried in the most prominent part of the cemetery behind that church, St. Augustine Cemetery. His second son built the big house at Melrose, so they're part of the Melrose story, which then connects them to the Henry family, or the Herzog family, then the Henry family, and Cammie Henry and Clementine Hunter. And Cammie Henry is also buried in the American Cemetery.
Cammie Henry is
Yes.
amazing. We need to do a show just on her. We went to the genealogical library. Am I saying it
Yes.
right? And I couldn't believe the books they pulled out of her scrapbooks. And yet, you couldn't touch it without gloves kind of thing.
You went to the archives up at NSU.
Yeah. Oh my
Okay.
God. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. I mean, this was stuff that she
It's
kept.
crazy.
She basically, I feel like she was the caretaker of history of Natchitoches when she was there. What was going on? And she had like the almanac and funny thing. Like there's some funny stuff in there. Like she's funny. She's got a sense of humor, and she kind of kept all the gossip too.
She put together
That's cool.
about 256 scrapbooks, and she just
Wow.
items that she thought was interesting, things of note, newspapers, magazines. She would put them
Wow.
in her scrapbooks, and they were eventually bound into actual books. If you go to Melrose Plantation today, the gift shop is called the Bindery Gift Shop. It's where her scrapbooks were bound into actual books. And like you said, they were eventually donated to the library at Northwestern State University, which is why on the third floor, the archives are named after her, the Cammie G. Henry Research Center. And she's buried with some other Henrys in their own section of the American Cemetery.
Oh, see, now I need to come back. Okay, so I have questions about cemeteries in general and I'm sure you get these, and I think this is great that you're taking a tour because you may be fascinated and not know how to do genealogy properly. I mean, I'm just learning to say it properly. I'm just kidding, but I actually can't. But when you go to a cemetery, like where do you start? What are you looking for? But you're drawn to go there because it is fascinating. And we've been to some, like Easton, Pennsylvania was insanely crazy. Like the American Bandstand dude was there. So there's all these famous people and people that maybe not necessarily famous, but would be forgotten if the cemeteries didn't let people know that they were buried here. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
And then there's some cemeteries we've been to. We were in Coldwater, Michigan, and we didn't have time. We were told right before we were leaving town that this horse is buried in the cemetery. And he was one of the horses that fought over 12 wars in the Civil War and was bred there. And this little part of Michigan, and I mean little, was like the place of breeding horses for the Civil War. Who knew that even happened? And I'm going, oh my God, we got to go. Well, there's two sides of the cemetery, like a road is splitting both sides. And we're driving around and we didn't have time to do it. And we actually left without seeing this.
We couldn't find
marker.
it.
Right.
And we have to go
We
back.
have to go back.
I'm sick about it because we actually have a whole thing that we're doing on horses across America. And I'm like, that's the thing. So we never found it. And so where are we as in going to understand how to interpret a graveyard? Because some of the historic ones, like you just, there's some aren't marked, some are. Like, how do you even start?
Well, in thinking about cemeteries in general,
know.
I would go with the cemeteries or outdoor museums. And so some of the things that I would do or not do in a museum, I would do or not do in a cemetery. You know, one thing, I wouldn't make a lot of noise. I wouldn't touch anything. Some people like to go and sit on gravestones or walk over graves, and I don't like to do that sort of thing, both from a preservation standpoint and a personal respect kind of
what
thing.
about people that do these rubbings?
But that's also a personal thing and a cultural thing. There are other people in different places who treat it entirely differently, and that's up to them. How I would approach each cemetery might depend on who runs it, not in terms of status, but in terms of organization. If it's a national cemetery, and I know that things are going to be very orderly, I can approach things that way. Or if they have a way to look up who's buried where, a map, that helps out a lot. But sometimes you just run across a little community cemetery and it's maintained by the locals or not maintained by the locals. And you just sort of alter your expectations on what you're going to see in the site based on that. Every now and then somebody would ask, well, what's your favorite grave marker? And I don't really know if I have a favorite one. I like it when you go to New Orleans and you see the huge tombs, or if you go to Natchez City Cemetery, which is 110 acres of amazing, monuments and statuary. But I also like seeing a grave from, 1932 that's for a child who died early. And you can tell that it was a homemade grave, a marker just made by people who were trying to do the best they could at that point in their lives for their loved one who had just died. So you find different types of meaning in different types of places, but every cemetery, every graveyard, whatever you want to call it, was set aside for a specific purpose. And we say that they're for burying the dead, but they're also for the living to go visit and remember and learn and think about their relation to the people who are buried there.
We were in a cemetery in South Africa. I believe it's called Pilgrim's Rest. And the people who were deemed criminals were buried with their, I'm going to get this.
They were the other way around.
And their feet pointed east, where everybody else, their head pointed east.
Or something like that. They're buried the wrong way.
They were
wearing
Yes. So in some places you would bury people so that when they rose on Resurrection Day, they would be facing east, sort of like you put them up on a lever, and when they were levered up on Resurrection Day, they would be facing east so that they could see Jesus coming again. So it maybe if you didn't like those people, you might bury them backwards.
You buried them backwards so they could never go to heaven. Yeah. And then there was the
so we're fighting over heaven already. Like
and then there was the African thing of being buried without your shoes so you can't walk to heaven.
Interesting.
Those two things.
Yeah, we have a saying, like if you're mad at someone, you say, "Don't mess with me, I will kill you and I will eat your feet." And that means I will kill you and not let you go to heaven. So like that's the ultimate attack words. Like that's it. Don't mess with me. If a bar brawl happens, that's the saying you use. And leave your mother out of it too. Right. No, but that's the truth. That's the absolute truth.
That's what they used to say.
As you go, and you'll see different burial practices are one thing, but what people write on graves, how they decorate graves, how they commemorate their loved ones, that changes, over time. It changes regionally, it changes culturally. There's a lot of different ways that you can end up interpreting things as you walk through. And earlier you asked, where do I start when I go to a cemetery? It might depend if I'm looking for a specific something, But if that cemetery is what I'm doing that day, I walk through the gate and I take a left and I go up and down every single row, looking at the front and back of every grave.
Oh,
Wow.
I learned to look at the back. That was
and
that's
heaven
huge.
help me. Heaven help you if you go with me and you're not prepared, because sometimes things are on the opposite side that you would never
Yes.
expect to be there. The example that I like to give about this, have you heard of Marthaville, west of Natchitoches?
Yes, they have a festival coming up. Yes.
Yes, it's a small town west of Natchitoches. They have a cemetery there. It's either called Marthaville Cemetery or Marthaville City Cemetery. And when I went to see it, I was walking up and down each row, and I passed a man's grave, and I looked and I saw that he died relatively young. He was, he couldn't have been much more than 30, if that. And then I walked down the other side, so on the front of his grave, there was like a colored laser engraving of somebody bowling. And the man bowling is wearing a cowboy hat. He's got his belt on. He's got his boots and jeans and everything. Oh, okay. This guy liked bowling.
Wow.
I get it.
In
Then
color.
when you walk down the other side of his grave, there is a poem that he wrote about his thoughts and feelings and what he was going through when he learned that he was dying of AIDS.
Oh.
And
Wow.
if you looked at the front of it, you would never, ever guess what was on the back of it. And it starts with, why me? What did I do wrong? Into, what are people going to think? And then down into sort of acceptance and coming to grips with things. It's
Wow.
all of that on one grave marker. It was incredible.
That I think you bring a really good
That's
point, because
amazing.
I remember we were in Yerington, Nevada, and I'm gonna have to it was like the 50-cent fool. That was it. It was like one stone and like a yellow plasticky thing and a flower, the 50-cent fool. And I'm like, who's the 50-cent fool?
What's
And
that?
so then who is this? Why and how? And I'm getting it wrong, but it's just off the top of my head. But when you go through these, and we find graveyards in national park sites and park sites, especially ranches. Ranches tended to have their own graveyards,
Yes.
depending on where you go, farms, especially if they're out in the middle of nowhere,
The
there's
family
to me,
graveyard.
I feel driving through is weird to me, and we've had to do it just because of timing, but I feel like you should park the car and just start walking.
To me, that's the best way to do it, because you get to see a lot more. You get to go into the rows. It's also a lot safer, so you don't actually accidentally knock something over as you're driving through.
Yeah, right. There's just, it's a place of rest, and a car sound. I'm like, we don't need that, but taking these walks, so you lead people on Fridays at the first Friday of the month at 11, weather permitting.
11:30.
So 11:30, excuse me. Yeah. So where do people meet you?
At the front gate, which is pictured on on the background on your background behind you.
We put it on the lake
right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are places to park in the cemetery. I don't personally encourage it. The cemetery is right next door to Holy Cross Catholic Church, and there's a sign that says you're only supposed to park if you're on church business. I tend to think that visiting a cemetery is church business. But I always stop into the church and say a few prayers before I go to the cemetery. So I consider that to be my out. But
it's part of the downtown district. You could be parked downtown and walk there.
Yes,
it's not
you can park
to me,
in front of First
that.
Baptist Church, or park at Natchitoches Parish Library and walk there in a few minutes.
Yeah, and there's that bed and breakfast right there too, as I recall.
The Samuel Guy house is right behind it. So if
I
you're
wonder
staying
if
at
it's
Samuel
haunted.
Guy, there's an entrance right next to the front door.
I wonder if it's haunted, just because it's by the...
I don't know, but I've heard if you're at the Samuel Guy house, you have quiet neighbors.
Oh, that's a good one. And you're in the dead center of town. But I had to...
The most popular place in town, because people are dying to get in there.
Do you have any reoccurring stories about hauntings coming from the people in that particular graveyard?
I do not. I've heard stories about people who have died in the cemetery. I don't know any real bad stories about hauntings or ghosts, lingering on after their death. I mean, the most gruesome story I have that I've heard from a reliable source involves somebody who was walking back from a bar on the other side of the river one night and stumbled and caught a fence spike in an unfortunate location on his face.
Ow.
Oh,
Ouch.
it's a little bit gruesome
I
for
don't
a
care where it
podcast,
is.
but if
Ow.
if somebody wants to
Ow.
hear it in person, I'll tell it to them.
Well,
later.
okay, when you take these tours though, like, there's stories of the graves, like you were talking about the younger children, and we
Mhm.
covered No Man's Land, El Camino Trail, and we were out in Toledo Bend area as part of,
Mhm.
Natchitoches, No Man's Land, all of this. And we went up towards Zwali, and we were on a site of a mission that used to be part of the El Camino Real de los Tejas.
Mhm.
And it's near Zwali. And there were horses and this really small cemetery. And the lady who was with
Mhm.
us, none of us knew what happened, but it was very historic. And there were a bunch of little white crosses, and we're thinking, did something come through here? Was there some kind of flu? But they're little white crosses, so we thought it was kids. Maybe there was a fire. None of us knew what happened, but there were just little white crosses. And I can send you the photo. I got your email now. I'm sending you photos. I'm sorry, you're gonna go like, I really wish Arlene never connected us. But what was that? I mean, when you go through, it's been bugging me for years now, because I want to know
What happened?
how do you look those up? I know there's the Find a Grave site, right, that you can go
Right.
to. How do you look up a nameless grave?
Exactly. And I mean, you can try sort of death records, you can try church records, see if they have things like that. Old newspapers, actually, I think there's a subscription service called newspapers.com, which I have not used personally, but I've heard really, really good things about
Oh
for
yeah, they have
several
that
years.
we found some of our
Yes.
family history in that, and that was
Mhm.
some surprising stuff we don't
Big
need to tell on the
surprise.
air. But
Right.
anyway,
Yikes.
And if they're like in Natchitoches, we have the Genealogical Association. If there's something around like that, it could be helpful. The other thing, knock on the door every now and then and say, hey, what's going on over down the street? Where did the crosses come from?
yeah.
Yeah, sometimes all you have to do is ask, and it'll open not one door, but or a door that leads to a lot of other doors.
Right.
Yeah, and I wonder, how do cemeteries survive? The Julian Pioneer Museum, not the museum, but they also are connected to the gravesite in Julian's up in San Diego in Southern California, up in the mountains. So San Diego's a beach town, but they do have a mountain town
Mhm.
that's 4,500 feet up, and pioneers, Civil War history went down there, all kinds of Native Americans. I mean, this is like
Mhm.
miners, brawls, you name it. And the Pioneer Cemetery, they're still trying to fix things, because don't forget, you get earthquakes out there. I know you
Mhm.
guys get hurricanes, they get earthquakes, so things shift. And they're still finding old graves, not even
Mhm.
necessarily marked, but like these, like it's like a black brick kind of thing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So they have all these unmarked graves, and they have no clue who's buried in there. And then there's
Right.
the new people that have passed, and then they've got really historic people. We all go, oh, that's so and so, the founder of the town, that kind of thing. So we're seeing a lot of this across the country, these unmarked graves.
Unmarked graves.
How did
Yeah.
what do you, I mean, every town has its history. For Natchitoches, do you have the same thing with unmarked graves where you go, we just don't know? Like, because I mean, the
In the
history's so
American
deep
Cemetery, I
with you
think
guys.
there might be a few. For the most part, I mean, something might crumble due to neglect after years and years, and the information on it might be lost. What I think, so there's another cemetery in Natchitoches called Breda Cemetery. It's in a part of town they call Breda Town. It was the site of a plantation owned by a man named J.P. Breda. He didn't grow cotton. I think he grew grapes and pears, and I think he made wine and brandy. That's what.
Really?
Or
Nice.
Yes, so the community
Too bad he's
eventually
dead.
took over the cemetery
No.
site there. And when I was in graduate school, we did a volunteer cleanup at that cemetery. We're picking up sticks and, cutting limbs and raking leaves and all of this. And one of my classmates had a rake, and all of a sudden he heard, thunk, thunk. And so he took the rake and he just started going down, and there was a grave, maybe 12 by 12 or so, that was completely covered up with grass. We started pulling at it, cutting at it, whatever, and we rolled the sod away like it was carpet. It had completely covered the grave. Nobody who worked there knew it had been there. We had no idea we were going to see it. But when you looked around the cemetery, you thought, there's a lot of places in this cemetery that look exactly like this. How many of those actually have somebody buried there that we've just forgotten about? And it was another, it sort of looked like homemade poured cement or concrete that they had taken a stick and written the couple's name in. And somebody recognized the name and knew who they were. It's just that they had completely forgotten that that grave was there. So that can happen. It can happen through, like you said, earthquakes and things resettling, but it can also just happen when things get overgrown and people forget about them.
Wow. So this is an important thing for people in their community to not forget their graveyard. Like, so some of them, like that was one, even Bayou Rapids, that they were saying that we need people to help to keep these gravestones clean, maintained, like you were saying, the markers, like you could,
It's
there's
history.
majority of the graveyards that we go to, it's actually hard to read the markers anymore. It's getting very, very difficult. And I don't, what do we do about that? And then there's all kinds of, like, I'm looking at art. I think there's a lot of art and beauty in what we see. But then there's a bunch of stuff that I go, man, that's some creepy stuff. What did you do? Why are there sheets? Like, it looks like there's people like, there, like when an umbrella, garden umbrella that you have on your patio and it's closed down. Well, there's a lot of that going on. What's going on with the sheet thing? Like, why are we doing that? And so there's all these other things. You just don't know what was going on. So it is about understanding the times before and what were they going through? Why? I mean, we were just in Nashville, North Carolina, and they had to move all the bodies because they had like this big sickness come through the town, and you're walking through Church Street and everyone's bodies are buried under there and they don't know who they are. Like, it's like crazy stuff. So
crazy.
Like when you think about like back in the day, they, we didn't have red tape and protocol. And you may only had the dirt that you had next to you,
But when you think about when you're going way back then and people were really full of superstition, how is it that they moved bodies? And then we read this thing where the head was left or the head was moved and the bodies were left. I'm like, no, come on. What's really going on? I mean, did they really?
Aren't you glad you joined our show?
No, but it is interesting. Do you think that there has ever been a time when cemeteries have moved bodies from one location to another?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's probably happened many times, and especially in the case of if development wants to take over that area. I think when was the most recent, let's see, the last time I saw a cemetery that I was pretty sure had been moved, I think maybe around Mamou, south of Alexandria. I think there's a cemetery that had been relocated. I forget exactly what the circumstances were, but I think they tried to document everybody who was where, and they dug everything up and they moved everything to another place. And I think that might have also happened. Not
want to be the truck that gets swerved off the highway with that.
No, but
I'm sure it's happened in a lot of places, and in other places they would just knock everything over and pave over it.
Well, that happens
because it was too much trouble.
No, but that's true. That's
paving over, that's one thing. But if you move a dead body, and then they put up an apartment complex or a house, I want to watch because I know you're going to get haunted.
Well, but you got to think that, there's going to be lots of places. I mean, that whenever they do something in a historic downtown to build or whatever, they have to bring in archaeologists to make sure we're not on, indigenous people's burial grounds and all,
Right.
Exactly.
there's a lot that does go on nowadays that we didn't have back in the day, and we could
Yes.
go back in the day like 100 or 300 years when we talk about Natchitoches,
Yes. Well, I know that in some places farmers would tell their workers, if you find anything, a bone, a pottery shard, an arrowhead, you keep your mouth shut.
Oh,
Because if word got out, oh, this is a historic site, we're going to have to shut down everything you're doing so we can investigate it.
Exactly.
But you mentioned paving over things, and it's going to be haunted. That was always where are y'all from originally?
California.
California.
What part
Sorry.
of California?
Yeah, Nancy.
Hollywood.
Yeah, she's from Hollywood. Silmar,
From
Northridge.
Northridge.
Yeah, where the
Gotcha.
earthquakes happen.
But we
So-
lived in Africa for a long time, so we have a lot of ghost stories.
Okay, so you might not be familiar with one of the legends about the Superdome in New Orleans where the Saints play, and the Saints were lousy for
No.
a long time. They said that the Superdome was built on the site of an old Native American burial ground.
Oh,
And so the site itself was haunted or cursed, and that's why the team was so bad for so long. And it makes for a good story, because otherwise we just have ourselves to blame, and that can't
So,
be good.
so did they move the Superdome?
Did they ever
Like, you got to
win
catch us up.
anything?
I know you're part of the
They did
Louisiana
not
Sports Hall of
move. They
Fame.
did not move the Superdome before a playoff game. When was it? Maybe sometime in the 90s, early 2000s. They had a witch doctor come in and remove the curse, or a voodoo priestess. It was one of those. They came in, and before the game, they had her do some sort of ceremony to get rid of the curse. I think they did end up winning the game after that.
That's
so-
crazy.
because
So I
I've
can't
seen-
prove that it worked, but it didn't.
but-
not.
I have to tell you, I've seen several African witch doctor ceremonies, and honestly, you will have nightmares afterwards. Even if your brain tells you this is not true, this is just whatever,
No,
it's scary. It's
It's-
scary stuff.
but it
It's
is about
just
it.
scary.
It's trippy. It's trippy.
It's
trippy.
yeah.
It's trippy. That
They're
kind of stuff
very-
is.
They're very good actors.
Or you think
Um,
because it is. I believe. Well, okay, you could say actors.
Well, they believe
however,
it.
yeah, and then so mind over
Plus-
matter, the law of attraction, right?
It's just weird. It's
But your
just weird.
energies can happen.
I don't know, dude.
Scotty,
But
are
I've
you
just seen.
are you glad you're here yet? Are you
Well,
okay? Are you hanging in there?
No, the things that go on in cemeteries have probably been going on for a very long time and take many, many forms.
Yeah, shapes and forms too. We could say
I
that
just-
as well.
I
I want to
would
get
be-
back. I want to go back to Natchitoches though. I know we've gone
Okay.
all over about this because it
Mhm.
is. It you just rarely get someone who takes cemetery tours around on a show, and then we're like, you have to take us on a tour when we come,
Yeah.
please, please. Even if it's not a Friday, please
I'll
take
be
us
here.
on a tour, please,
Okay.
because I want to go through because. There's so much to learn, and I know we do a lot of family history and genealogical shows, teaching people. But the cemetery thing is, I mean, if there's no little booklet, it's confusing. And I think going on a
Mhm.
tour has got to be so cool. Have you had any tours where people are active? Because Natchitoches history, when you think
Mhm.
about
Mm,
pre-Cane River Lake that you have, what's kind of an oxbow, and then I see online it's not an oxbow. I'm like, yes, it is. No, it's not. So whatever, you've got this water, beautiful riverfront, let's just say, right? But it used to be the Red River. Okay, so at this point, didn't Natchitoches have like it was like a ship city in a way, right? So at
Yes.
some time.
So for a while, Natchitoches was the northernmost point on Red River that you could ship anything because of the Great Raft. If nobody's heard of the Great Raft, it was an enormous log jam that stretched miles and
Oh.
miles and miles and was
Yeah.
around for years and years and years. You know,
Cool.
how big it was fluctuated over time, but it prevented anything from coming farther north on Red River.
Wow.
So you could run a steamboat up to downtown Natchitoches where the Church Street Bridge is now and unload your supplies, your cotton, your shipment or whatever. And that's because it was technically part of Red River. Then in the 19th century, Red River jumped its banks completely, and now it runs north and east of town. For a while, King
Wow.
River still did connect to Red River, but it wasn't used for shipping as much, because by that time, Henry Shreve, who Shreveport is named after, he cleared the Great Raft. That's how Shreveport got to be a thing, because now you can go farther north on Red River.
That would be a great movie.
Yes.
That would be an awesome movie.
That you'd have to get a lot of dynamite to make that movie.
But dude, it would be a great movie.
Well, let's keep going with the river thing, because
go
to
ahead,
me was
sorry.
about, with all of that, with Natchitoches being so prominent, that, you know, only you've got to think about no man's land, you got to think about Louisiana Purchase time. I mean, all of this history, and also wars and the Battle of New Orleans. You know, people are floating up through the, you know, up to Natchitoches from there too. All of this history is international history. So genealogy, when you think about tracing your family roots, Natchitoches has to be a prime hub for people to really trace their family history back. And that cemetery's got to be a big part of it.
What's pretty cool, every now and then I'll meet somebody who say that they're descended from maybe Saint Denis or one of the commandants at the French fort.
Oh,
like
wow.
they're descended from a Messier or somebody like that. But so you had Natchitoches where it is, and then 15 miles, which is the French settlement. And 15 miles west of town, you had Los Adias, which was the capital of Spanish Texas for a while, where the Spanish had their fort. And you mentioned no man's land a couple of times. It's sort of, okay, where's the border between France and Spain? And then eventually, where's the border between the United States and Spain? How are we going to agree on this? And for a while, they just sort of agreed not to agree on anything. But yes, a lot of people have come through the area. A lot of people came here because of opportunity to make a new life somewhere else. A lot of people came here because they wanted to get away from a life that they needed to leave behind someplace else.
Ooh.
So, or they were sent here against their own free will. But different people, we think of things, we've got the Native Americans here. That's part of it. We've got the French and we've got the Spanish. Oh, and then the Americans took over. We think of that as sort of the Anglos, the English.
Yeah, who are you?
But we have Germans, we have Eastern Europeans, we have we have East Asians.
See, it's like little Europe.
Yeah, they've wandered through for different reasons at different periods of time.
So when
But
you
these
take
people were
through,
all opportunists.
Yes, I mean, that's probably why my ancestors showed up at some point. Pierre Matoyer, we talked about him earlier. He and his brother came up through New Orleans. His brother stayed in New Orleans. Pierre kept coming up. And I think his original plan was probably to make some money and then go back to France. And before you know it, he's got 10 kids with Marie-Therese Quan. He married after the two of them separated and had a few more children. So now Pierre Matoyer has tens of thousands of descendants all over the country and in different parts of the world, just because he decided to make his home in Natchitoches.
well, we did a interview out of Melrose Plantation with a lady who did a very short reenactment that we were actually using for audio, and for some reason I had to upload it to YouTube, and to this day I'm still getting comments like, oh, I'm a descendant from this,
Yeah.
we're getting that even on podcasts. Like, I mean, this was years ago, but I'd say every 2 months or so, here comes another.
Yes. So
one.
what was she reenacting? Marie-Therese Quan? Yeah, that was probably Betty Matoyer.
It was Betty Matoyer.
Yes,
Betty
Matoyer Rock. The first time she introduced herself to me, she said, "My name is Betty Matoyer Rock." And if you're not from here, you would think she said Matoyer twice by mistake. But I knew, no, she was a Matoyer who married a Matoyer, because there are so many after all of these years that they were both Matoyers, but not closely related enough to cause problems.
Wow. So it's a circular family, but not. Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Right.
a figure eight.
Wow.
It's a figure eight.
So it's such a fascinating story. I mean,
Yes.
and now your last name Williams. So are you on the British side that came through?
I know I have, my ancestry is kind of all over Western Europe. The Williams that I think probably England is that, but there's some Paynes on my grandfather's side who came from Ireland. My great-great-great-grandparents who immigrated from Ireland, they're in
So
the American
Payne
cemetery.
Williams, so they put his name at the front.
That's been passed down to a few people, yes.
That's interesting. That's it.
Mhm.
See, that's the thing about genealogy. You have to dig in and you have to kind of, the names are hard because people
Yes.
will change the names too. You know,
Mhm.
they'll,
And the
Especially the
spellings change.
spellings. Yeah.
the spellings
Yeah,
change.
because spelling used to not mean anything because everybody knew who you were talking about.
Right.
Yeah. And if it
See?
was too difficult,
Mhm.
then they,
Or it
like,
depends
I
if you had,
know,
if you're crossing to other countries
Yeah.
and you didn't want people to know your roots
Yes,
as well.
yeah,
exactly.
that's
And,
true.
on my mom's side of the family, my grandmother's maiden name was Resseguet, Resseguet. Back when they were in France, before they left France, it was with a C instead of two S's. And when you go back
Huh.
a few generations before that, the name was taken after the tool that the men of the family used in their profession, which was a cross-cut saw, which was called an arseguet. So it was arseguet, then Resseguet with the C, then Resseguet with two S's. And
Wow.
it got switched around a lot.
Wow. So that's something,
Yeah.
going
Mm.
back into genealogy and digging up your family
interesting.
roots, not necessarily their grave, is you
No,
go to
you
the
don't dig up the
cemeteries
grave.
because that's, I think sometimes you can really find out, like you,
Well,
and it's a connection. To me, that's a thing where that's as close as you're going to get to your ancestor.
Yes.
you know,
And-
it's interesting because if you go to a site like that, then you actually are seeing most likely the truth as opposed to what your family may have told you. I'm just leaving it at that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that get lost or omitted on purpose along the way. But
Yes.
that, I think what you just said reminded me, there are limits to what you can find in a cemetery, because let's say that you're looking at somebody's grave from the 18th or 19th century, and it's a husband and wife, and you've got Mr. John Smith. Okay, we all know who he is. He's John Smith. Well, buried next to him is Mrs. John Smith.
Yeah, but you don't know.
We don't know
who she
what her
is.
first name was.
Yeah,
Maybe we
yeah.
know when and where she was born, but her identity as, Cynthia Thomas, the first 20 years of her life, is completely lost now because it was sort of subsumed by her identity as the wife of John Smith.
See, but that's
for
just
sure.
the interesting
Yeah.
part of history. When you take people on these tours, because I really want to go back, and we've gone all over the map with this, but
No,
how
it's
can you not
interesting.
when it's Natchitoches? I mean, the oldest city in Louisiana, and the Purchase and the cemetery is that old. When you think, I really want to go. I mean, I've been bugging her. I'm like, Arlene, I want to go. You got to get him on the show. Get him on the show. Thank you, Arlene. The thing
Thanks
was
for going
going
to
on.
Italy, Arlene.
I know I mean, she
Yeah.
likes to try. Well, good for her, man. She works her butt off. I'm happy for her having a good time in Italy right now. I'm glad. But, when you think about, and we always think, this is airing in October for Halloween and all of that, I think we should go all the time, but there is something mystical, and as the seasons change, there is something about it. But going on a tour, whether it's November, December, January, who cares when, there is something about having someone being able to point out, hey, this is so and so. I mean, what happens in that cemetery, like when you cannot read a tombstone? Does the
Right.
cemetery fix it? I mean, that's something that, you as a guide can help us know who it is. You know what I mean? Are there prominent people that you make sure to always take? Do you do the same tour each time? I mean,
So it's generally the same, and I'll tell you about. I had a group, and a woman was trying to decide whether or not she wanted to take the tour. So I was up front and I said,
What?
well, here's
just
what
go.
I said, well, here's what the tour is not. I'm not going to stop at every grave and say, this is so-and-so. This is when they were born. This is when they died. Their marker says that they were a beloved husband and father, and he's dearly
Yeah,
missed.
because you could
And
do
then
that
go on
your
and do that for every single grave. And said, oh, thank goodness, it's too hot for that. So I have, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 8 or 10 graves that I'll specifically point out along the way. I'll talk about the history of the site. I'll talk about why Natchitoches is where it was and why it's called what it's called, sort of some of the things we've gone over on talking right now. And I'll point out some of the different parts of the cemetery, some of the notable burials, talk about how the cemetery has changed over the years, what's different from the way it used to be, where it's expanded. Just pointing out a few stories along the way, because that's really what it is. It's storytelling. And the rest of it, we don't walk around the whole cemetery. We sort of make a loop around the middle part. And I tell people, this is where we're going to go. This is what I'm going to talk about. And if you have any questions along the way, I'll answer every question you have. When we're done making the loop, if you want to walk over to another part of the cemetery and you want me to come with you in case you have questions, I'll do that too. So usually we're talking really 40 to 45 minutes, which—
And it's free.
Yes,
that is
and
so
it's free.
Awesome.
You can
that
leave
you
at any
that.
time, and some people have. You can join at any time, and some people have.
Have you ever had anybody take out a cell phone? We did a graveyard tour
and try to talk to the grave.
And somebody took out their phone, and they had an app on their phone, and they put it on. It was so funny. I thought I was going to wee in my pants. So because she put the phone on.
She did, y'all. No, I'm kidding.
No, I didn't, but it was close because
it's a ghost hunting. That was a ghost hunting trip.
Yeah, and so the voice was supposed to be a ghost from that grave. You started talking. It was the funniest thing I ever saw.
What do you think? But I know, but what do you think about this stuff? No, seriously. So is that a no or an okay thing to do?
Again, I would leave the graves alone for the most part. I would not put anything on them. I would not try to record any sounds. I would not try and play any sounds. I don't think that was the intention of the people who buried their loved ones there. Exactly. But if you're investigating things, I would hope that you would do so in as non-invasive manner as possible.
Okay,
who
on this? Who are some of the people that you do stop at?
So I mentioned Pierre Matoire.
That's huge. Yeah,
talked about him earlier. And in the interest of full disclosure, I was a tour guide at Melrose for 2.5 years before I started at the museum.
You got the history,
I've spent a lot of time talking about Pierre and Marie-Thérèse Coin. I can do it, forwards, backwards, upside down, and inside out.
See, I always said Coin, so now I know that I've been messing it up for years.
Yeah, so, I mean, I say Coin. There are people who say Coin. When I say Coin to either French people or Cajun speakers, they all start laughing and giggling, because in French, Coin is the sound that a duck makes.
Well, there you go.
So I talk about Pierre and Marie-Thérèse. I do talk about the Prudhomme some. I talk about Cammie Henry and her involvement, both as the owner of Melrose Plantation and as the lady who ran the artist retreat at Melrose.
See,
and that leads into Clementine Hunter and Francois Mignon, and we haven't even talked about them yet.
Yeah, Clementine's in St. Augustine. I photographed her grave.
She and Francois are both down at St. Augustine.
Yeah, but the whole thing, that whole artist community to me is just this magic land that they created. Like that was, and a lot of places happen in the South and the Northeast with these communities that it's unique and cool. And when you go to Melrose Plantation and you can imagine that kind of creativity happening. There was the guy that was in that one area, there's the African house, but is it the Yucca House?
The Yucca House.
Yeah. That lived there.
Francois Mignon.
Okay, that's who it is. Yeah.
let me do my air quotes. Francois Mignon. That is a much longer story. So I talk about, that's what Cammie Henry leads me into. I talk about John Gideon Lewis, who was the most worshipful master of one of the Masonic groups here, probably the most prominent African-American buried in the cemetery. He's got a great mausoleum. Talk about John Sibley, who was the Indian agent appointed by Thomas Jefferson. He had been a doctor or a doctor's assistant during the Revolutionary War. And he was in charge of basically finding out what was in this area after the Louisiana Purchase. We've all heard of Lewis and Clark, who went along the Oregon Trail out to the Pacific. John Sibley kind of did that for Red River.
Wasn't he a newspaper man too? Or am I getting my guys messed up?
I don't remember him being a newspaper man, but I'd have to
Does he
check.
have the little? Okay, so Sibley Lake is
He was
named
a
after
doctor.
him.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a. So there's like when you look over Cane River Lake, so there's the cemetery, then you go towards the lake, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the park for Still Magnolia's lady
Susan
there.
Harlan.
Yeah, thank you. Then you go down a little bit, and then there's the bridgey thing, a
Mhm.
bridge. But there's this
Yes.
tiny park, and it's dedicated to one guy.
Yes,
Is
there's a
that him?
bust of John Sibley right at the corner of
So
the
it's
bridge.
him, and he was a
Yes.
newspaper man
Okay.
years before. Yeah, I got
That's
all
a
into
huge
his
family.
history.
The Sibley
no,
family's
I
Yes.
big.
wonder about him and the bird books, the birding guides, the
Yes.
Sibley, because
Mhm.
they're the best birding guides. I mean, I know there's the Audubon thing, but like Sibley is, if you're a bird
big
watcher,
name.
the Sibley guide is like the gold, right?
It's
So
the
I wonder if
Bible.
they're related. But anyway, that's the rabbit holes we all go down to if you like history. You know what I mean? But that's it. So he's in there. He's at the cemetery.
Yes.
I need
John
to go
Sibley
just
is
to see
buried in the
him. I
American
need to go say
Cemetery.
hello. Oh my God, he's amazing. His
And
history's
a couple
amazing.
of others. There's a man named Mayor Theodore Edward Pullman, who, to my knowledge, is the only mayor of Natchitoches who was ever assassinated in the line of duty.
Oh,
What?
Back in the about
Wow.
100 years ago or so at this point.
wow.
And then at the start of the tour, I do point out the oldest marked grave, which comes from 1797, belonged to a lady
Wow.
named Marie-Anne d'Artagot, who was originally from France. And the big sign in front of the American Cemetery calls it the oldest cemetery in the Louisiana Purchase. St. Louis #1 in New Orleans probably disputes the claim, but I've heard a very good argument that where St. Louis 1 is now is not where it originally was, that it's been moved since it was first started. And maybe if you consider the second St. Louis #1 to be, have been started after the American Cemetery in Natchitoches, that makes the American Cemetery the oldest one in the Louisiana Purchase.
So take that.
See, there's a lot of ghosts roaming around in
I know.
Louisiana
Oh,
because
don't
they
say
keep
ghosts,
moving
spirits,
people.
spirits.
So when
Oh
I
my
worked
God.
at Melrose, people would ask, what's it like at night? And, because it's dark and it's out very isolated. And there's all these, it was a plantation with a lot of enslaved people. So, do you have the ghost? People would basically ask, do you have the ghosts of slaves haunting the place, or anybody else's ghosts? And in 2.5 years, I was probably at Melrose at every time of day, except maybe between like 2:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning. Because a couple of times I had to go in really early and a couple of times I stayed really late. And I told people the scariest thing here is me. Now, but some people would say, oh, I saw a lady on the steps as I was driving away and she was looking at me funny. And one day we had a lady who said she was a medium come on the tour. And my coworker gave her the tour and she said, that lady said she saw ghosts everywhere. And I said, well, that makes sense, because if you're a medium who doesn't see ghosts everywhere, you're not much of a medium. So I do know somebody who would like to start a ghost tour in the downtown historic district. And she's probably going to get a restraining order against me, so I can't come anywhere near it.
Oh, come on. No, it's good to have different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Well,
There's nothing wrong with that.
I think there are spirits. I mean, everyone's got their thing, right? And I think that if you are open to it, then they'll hang out with you. If you're not open to it, they're not going to come see you. But I heard Magnolia Plantation was where all the shenanigans really happens.
That would be Ghost Hunters International went down there several years ago, if I remember right, and found some suspicious activity, and I think questioned the veracity of the National Park Service worker who wouldn't cop to there being ghosts there. But Magnolia does have several original slave cabins on the site.
Yeah,
so
we
if
went
you're
in,
looking for something spooky going on, that's one place to go look. It has an original wood screw press, which is very rare in the South.
Yeah. And when you think about, and I went there where the donkey would go around and everything, and but when you go in those cabins, those slave cabins are, I think,
They're
the only
creepy,
brick
whether or
brick
not
ones,
there's ghosts.
brick ones that you can find in the
Mm.
South or even in this country that are still
Mm-mm.
standing. And there's a creepiness because I think
'Cause
a
you
lot of
know.
times we can talk about spirits and everything, but there's just, stuff went down there. There's a
Yeah.
feeling to it. And bad things happened, and
You can
it's
feel it.
something that's, whenever we talk about the history of the South, I mean, it's not just this country, it's around the world. Slavery happened
Yeah.
everywhere, and
Mhm.
we can't ignore it. We need to just, all of us, communicate about it and not
Mhm.
let it happen again, obviously, but don't throw it
Mhm.
away. Don't ignore it. And also know that it's there. And I think it's important to go to these places. And I think our Park Service does an amazing job of interpreting here's the facts, ma'am. There it is,
Mhm.
Let's
And
just
then
get
make up
to
your
the
own
point,
mind.
Or
the same thing.
they'll talk about when they had to renovate or remodel or repair something, they'll find things in the attic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Emblems or logos or medallions or just different things all wrapped together that was supposed to have a supernatural effect on the place where they were. The most famous ghost in Natchitoches is probably Isabella. I'm not sure you've heard of her or
Oh,
not.
no.
She haunted NSU's campus for a long time and might
Cool.
still, but there are a few legends about how she came to be about, but she was a young French woman who either was jilted by a lover or whose lover died and she wasted away. And then she started haunting different buildings on campus. Every now and then they would have to tear a building down. So they would hold a ceremony where they moved Isabella from building to building. It became a big deal.
When I was in boarding school, there
Wow.
was a ghost too. There's always the lost love, the forlorn,
Yes.
lovelorn, I should
That
say.
kid-
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the lovelorn. It's the,
What's that lady in South
The long
Africa
black-
on the bridge?
the long black
What's
cloak.
that lady? The
There's
lady.
always someone on a bridge. There's always someone in a
Mhm.
campus, whether it's a boarding school or a university. There's always a woman there that's going to get you. It's an old
On the
matron
bridge.
sometimes too.
Yes.
So that's going to happen. Scotty, thank you so much for joining us. It has been
It
a
was so much
pleasure.
fun.
And I really, when we get to Natchitoches again, we want to go walking the cemetery
yeah,
with
we
you. And
do.
I've got, as you know, I've got 20 million questions. I mean, I could talk all day about it because it's just, well, the one thing I want to say is I just think that they are forgotten I'm so glad we're doing this on our Natchitoches show because I know Arlene understands the importance of responsible tourism.
Mhm.
And I think we've got to include our graveyards and cemeteries
yeah.
and resting places as part of places to visit and respect and support. And I don't know who supports or protects and maintains the American cemetery, but as we're traveling the country, we're finding that they need help. A lot of times it's all run
Mhm.
by volunteers, master gardeners, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
we've got to,
It's history.
it's
the town's
part of
history. It's the
history and a
state's
lot of
history.
times
It's
forgotten.
important.
And then there's a bunch of people like us that will travel just to see graveyards. So
Yeah.
In this case, there is something called the American Cemetery Association. They're responsible for the site in general, but each individual grave, I think, is the responsibility of the family members
Right.
of the person buried there. Yeah, they arrange for the landscape crews to mow and to weed eat and things like that, pick up limbs, all of that.
oh, that's nice that you have that because a lot of
Mhm.
places they are in trouble.
They
Right.
just left. Yeah.
And we're lucky enough that I've mentioned Northwestern State University a couple of times. On campus is an entity that actually works for the Park Service. It's called the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, NCPTT. One of their staff members used to work for the city of Savannah, taking care of cemeteries. And about once a
wow.
year, one of the local preservation organizations, the Natchitoches Historic Foundation, gets together with him, and they have the sort of arranged for a community grave cleaning event at the cemetery. So it's a nice volunteer activity that is supervised by somebody who knows what he's doing. So it's not just a bunch of people coming out with bleach and power washers trying to make things look
trying to do
clean and
something
shiny,
they
which is
shouldn't.
going to tear
Yeah.
everything apart. So
Yeah.
that happens about once a year, and it's nice to see that. But but it's an uphill battle in a lot of places because
Sure.
if you have some people working on it, well, in 10 years, what if those people aren't here anymore? What if the site just deteriorates? What if you don't have money to do everything that you know needs to be done? And in some cases, well, just in the last 3 years, we had a hurricane and an ice storm.
Yeah.
It's very rare for an actual hurricane strength storm to reach Natchitoches. By the time it gets this far inland, it's usually more of a tropical storm. And ice storms and snow are not exactly our thing here. But in the last 3 years, a hurricane came through, knocked over a bunch of trees and limbs. Ice storm took care of, some of the things that were left over after that. So there is a lot of recent damage that's taken place that can happen in a lot of places. And it's something that people need to keep in mind and plan for, even if you think it's pretty unlikely.
Right. I think that's a good point because, I mean, they're special places, they're sacred grounds, and they're just left off the list a lot of times. And there's other than there's the people like us and you and others, that's, oh, I'm going to a new place. First thing I want to do is go to the cemetery. And then you geek out and go down 20 million rabbit holes of people's families and their history. So, which is it's a fun thing, and you learn history, and I think what it does, what people don't talk about, we talk about ghosts and all of that, but the reality is that graveyards connect you to real people in history, and that's a very important thing. So we understand, like, it's like we were talking about going into the slave homes at Magnolia Plantation. You will feel something, because it happened, and it's cooler in there, and it's just, I mean, we were there on a summer day, hot, sweaty, and you go in, and it's a different deal. And I think these places, the history is there.
Well, it proves
it's tangible, and it makes it human, not just a year and a date in a book. You know what I mean? And so I think
it proves the history.
Right. And what you're doing, taking people on tours, I love it. And everyone, go see Scotty at the Louisiana Hall of Fame at the Sports Museum, and then also the Louisiana State History Museum right next door. And
no, it's all the same thing. It's all in one building. Yeah, it's 2 floors. It's part Sports Hall of Fame Museum. It's part Regional History Museum. You walk in the front door, you'll be able to see it all.
And you'll see Scotty. And, hey,
you'll see me 5 days a week.
Have you met Terry Bradshaw yet? Has he come through those doors?
Haven't seen him yet. Maybe he'll pop in at some point. But he is one of our more prominent members.
Yes, he is. He is. Well, thank you so much, Scotty. Everyone, keep up with Natchitoches and plan your adventure. Go to natchitoches.com, and that's natchitoches.com. Did I get it right, Scotty?
Excellent. Well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And everyone, keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Again, we do the show every third Tuesday, learning about the Louisiana's oldest city, Natchitoches. So stay tuned. Thanks so much, Scotty.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scotty.